For 3 decades, I watched my husband chase his dreams while he believed I was standing in his way. Every sacrifice I made, every penny I saved, every sleepless night I spent working extra shifts to fund his ambitions, he never knew about. The shoebox hidden in our attic held the truth that would change everything between us forever. But when Robert finally discovered what I'd been hiding all these years, his reaction wasn't what either of us expected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Ellen Hayes, though most folks in Millbrook just call me Maggie. At 72 years old, I've lived through enough seasons of joy and heartbreak to fill several lifetimes, but nothing prepared me for the moment my husband, of 45 years, would finally understand the depth of my love for him. This story begins not at the end, but at a beginning that felt more like an ending, when Robert looked me in the eye and said words that cut deeper than any blade ever could. It was a Tuesday morning in early March when everything unraveled. The kitchen still smelled like the bacon I'd fried for his breakfast, and Robert sat at our worn wooden table with his coffee growing cold, staring at yet another rejection letter. This one was from Thompson Publishing, the 5th company to turn down his manuscript in as many months. His shoulders sagged with the weight of disappointment, and I could see the familiar storm clouds gathering in his gray eyes. Robert Allen Hayes had been chasing his dream of becoming a published author since before we married. He'd written 17 novels over the years, each one carefully crafted with the devotion of a man who believed words could change the world. Romance novels, mystery thrillers, science fiction adventures, even a collection of poetry that made me cry every time I read it in secret. Every single manuscript had been rejected, sometimes with form letters, sometimes with encouraging notes that felt more cruel than kind. I was washing the breakfast dishes when he finally spoke, his voice carrying a bitterness I'd never heard before. 43 years, Margaret. 43 years I've been writing, and what do I have to show for it? Nothing but a pile of rejection, letters, and a wife who thinks it's all a waste of time. The plate in my hands nearly slipped into the soapy water. I turned to face him, my heart already racing. Robert, that's not true. You know I believe in your writing. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do I? Because every time I talk about my stories, you change the subject. Every time I get excited about a new idea, you remind me about the bills that need paying. Every time I mention taking a writing workshop or going to a conference, you find a reason why we can't afford it. I opened my mouth to protest, but he held up his hand. I'm not finished. You want to know what hurts? The most? It's not the rejections from publishers. It's knowing that my own wife, the woman who's supposed to love me most in this world, has never once believed I could make it as a writer. You've spent our entire marriage treating my dreams like they're some kind of hobby that I'll eventually outgrow. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire neither of us knew how to extinguish. I stood there in my faded blue apron, my hands dripping dishwater onto the linoleum floor, feeling like everything I'd worked for over the past 3 decades had just crumbled to dust. That's not fair, I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew how it must have looked from his perspective. How could I explain that every time I changed the subject, it was because I was afraid of accidentally revealing what I'd been hiding? How could I tell him that I'd never attended those writing conferences with him because I'd been working extra shifts to pay for them without him knowing? Robert stood up from the table, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Fair? You want to talk about fair? I've watched my friends' wives support their husbands' dreams. Tom's wife Sarah drove him to every job interview when he was trying to change careers. Linda helped Michael set up his workshop when he wanted to start making furniture. But you, Margaret, you've never once asked to read my work. Not once in 43 years. That accusation hit me like a physical blow. If only he knew that I'd read every single word he'd ever written, that I'd snuck into his study late at night to read his latest chapters by lamplight, that I'd cried over his beautiful descriptions and laughed at his clever dialogue. If only he knew that I'd memorized entire passages from his novels and quoted them to myself when I was feeling lonely or sad. "I just think you should be realistic about your expectations," I said, falling back on the same careful words I'd used for years to protect the secret that was eating me alive from the inside. His face darkened. "Realistic. Right. Well, let me be realistic then. I'm 68 years old, Margaret. If I'm going to make this dream happen, it has to be now. But I can't do it while fighting you every step of the way." He walked toward the kitchen door, then paused with his hand on the frame. When he turned back to look at me, I saw something in his eyes that terrified me more than anger or disappointment. I saw resignation. "I've decided to take that job at Hartwell Insurance, full-time. Jerry called yesterday and said the position is still open if I want it." My heart stopped. Hartwell Insurance was where dreams went to die. It was where Robert's old college roommate Jerry worked, processing claims and pretending to be satisfied with a steady paycheck and good benefits. Robert had always sworn he'd rather starve than spend his remaining years in a cubicle, filing paperwork and attending meetings about quarterly projections. "Robert, you don't mean that." "I do mean it. It's time to grow up, Margaret. Time to put away childish things and face reality. Jerry says I can start Monday." He left the kitchen, and I heard his footsteps on the stairs as he climbed up to his study. A few minutes later, I heard the typewriter that had been my rival for over 4 decades start its familiar clacking rhythm. He was writing, probably working on his current manuscript, maybe finishing it before he gave up forever. I sank into his empty chair at the kitchen table and put my head in my hands. Everything was falling apart, and it was all my fault. Not because I hadn't supported his dreams, but because I'd supported them in secret for so long that he'd convinced himself I was his enemy instead of his greatest ally. The shoebox was hidden in the far corner of our attic, behind a stack of Christmas decorations that we only brought down once a year. I'd been adding to its contents for 30 years, ever since the day I realized that Robert's writing meant more to him than anything else in the world, including me. And maybe that was okay. Maybe love sometimes meant stepping back so the person you cared about could step forward. But I'd miscalculated somewhere along the way. In trying to support him without his knowledge, I'd created a distance between us that had grown wider with each passing year. He thought I didn't care about his writing, when the truth was that his writing was the most important thing in my world, too. The first item I'd put in that shoebox was a carbon copy of his very first novel, the one he'd written in the early years of our marriage when we were living in that tiny apartment above Peterson's bakery. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He'd been so secretive about it, working on it late at night after his shifts at the lumber yard, and I'd been curious about what he was creating with such dedication. One day when he was at work, I'd found the carbon copy he'd made for submission, and read the entire thing in one sitting. It was beautiful. Not perfect, but beautiful in the way that first attempts often are, full of raw emotion and genuine voice. The story was about a young man trying to find his place in the world after returning from war, and I could see so much of Robert in those pages. His gentleness, his determination, his deep capacity for love that he sometimes had trouble expressing in real life. That night, when he came home from work, I wanted so badly to tell him how much his story had moved me. But he seemed so nervous about it, so afraid of criticism, that I was worried anything I said might sound patronizing or insincere. So instead, I just kissed him and asked how his day had been, and he never mentioned the novel at all. The rejection letter came 3 weeks later. I found him sitting at our kitchen table, holding the form letter with tears in his eyes. "They said it doesn't fit their current needs," he told me, and his voice was so small that I wanted to wrap my arms around him and promise that everything would be okay. but I didn't know how to comfort him without revealing that I'd read his work. So I made dinner and listened to him talk about maybe trying a different genre, maybe writing something more commercial, maybe just giving up altogether. And while he talked, I planned. The next day, while Robert was at work, I took the bus to the library in the next town over and spent hours researching literary agents and publishers. I made a list of 20 potential places to submit his novel, complete with submission guidelines and contact information. Then I went to the bank and withdrew $50 from our savings account, money we'd been putting aside for a new refrigerator. I mailed out 20 submission packets over the next month, each one accompanied by a carefully crafted cover letter that I wrote and rewrote until every word was perfect. I used a post office box in the next town and signed the letters with Robert's name, making sure to use his typewriter to prepare everything so the formatting would match his usual submissions. 19 of those submissions were rejected, but the 20th one, sent to a small literary magazine called Prairie Voices, was accepted. They offered to publish an excerpt from his novel in their spring issue and wanted to know if he had any short stories they could consider for future publications. When the acceptance letter arrived at our house, addressed to Robert, he stared at it for a full 5 minutes before he could speak. "I never submitted anything to Prairie Voices," he said, looking confused. "Maybe you forgot," I suggested, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "You've sent out so many submissions." He frowned, trying to remember, but eventually decided that he must have indeed forgotten. The joy on his face when he realized his work was going to be published was worth every lie I'd told to make it happen. That was the beginning of my secret career as Robert's unpaid agent, publicist, and biggest fan. Over the next 30 years, I submitted his work to contests, magazines, and publishers. I researched markets, crafted query letters, and kept detailed records of every submission and response. I celebrated his successes and mourned his rejections, all from the shadows. But more than that, I found ways to fund his dream without him knowing where the money was coming from. When he wanted to attend a writers' conference in Chicago, I told him we couldn't afford it, then picked up extra shifts at the hospital where I worked as a nurse and secretly paid for his registration, hotel, and travel expenses. I had the conference organizers tell him he'd won a scholarship. When his typewriter broke and he couldn't afford to replace it, I worked overtime for 2 months and then arranged for his sister to surprise him with a new one for his birthday. When he needed research materials for his historical novel, I bought the books and left them on his desk with a note saying they were from the library's free book program. I kept every acceptance letter, every positive rejection that included encouraging comments, every review of his published short stories. I clipped his name from the contributors' notes in literary magazines and saved every copy of publications that featured his work. The Shoebox grew fuller with each passing year, a secret archive of a writing career that Robert thought was failing, but was actually quietly succeeding. The hardest part wasn't the money or the time or even the elaborate deceptions. The hardest part was watching him doubt himself when I had a box full of evidence that he was talented, that his work mattered, that people were reading and appreciating what he created. There were nights when he'd come to bed discouraged after another rejection, and I'd lie awake beside him, desperate to show him the acceptance letter that had arrived that same day for a story he'd submitted months earlier. But I'd started the charade, and I didn't know how to end it without admitting that I'd been lying to him for decades. How do you tell your husband that you've been secretly managing his writing career behind his back? How do you explain that? Every time you discouraged him, you were actually working to encourage him in ways he'd never know about? The lies became easier over time, but they also became heavier. When Robert's story won second place in a national short fiction contest, complete with a $500 prize, I had to pretend to be only mildly interested when he showed me the letter. When a literary agent requested a full manuscript after reading one of his published stories, I had to watch him get excited about an opportunity I'd created for him while acting like it was no big deal. And when his novel, Bridges in the Rain, was finally accepted by Millfield Press, a small but respected publishing house. I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming with joy. Instead, I suggested that maybe he should be cautious about getting his hopes up, that small publishers often change their minds. He signed the contract 3 days later, and I celebrated by myself in the hospital break room during my lunch shift, crying tears of joy and pride while eating a sandwich I couldn't taste. His book was going to be published. After 43 years of writing and 30 years of my secret support, Robert Allen Hayes was going to be a published novelist. But by then, the distance between us had grown so wide that even this triumph couldn't bridge it. He'd started to believe that I didn't care about his dreams, and I'd become so practiced at hiding my involvement that I couldn't figure out how to reveal the truth without destroying the trust between us. The publishing process took nearly a year. I watched Robert navigate the world of editing, cover design, and marketing while pretending to be only casually interested in his progress. When the first printed copy of his novel arrived in the mail, he held it in his hands like it was made of glass, and I could see tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. "It's real," he whispered. "After all these years, it's actually real." I wanted to tell him that it had always been real, that his talent had never been in question, that I'd believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. Instead, I smiled and said it was nice that his hobby had finally paid off. The words came out wrong, sounding dismissive when I meant them to be supportive. But I'd gotten so used to downplaying his achievements to protect my secret that I couldn't seem to stop myself. Robert's face fell, and he carefully set the book on the table like it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. "Right," he said quietly, "my hobby." That was 3 months ago. Since then, Robert had received a handful of positive reviews for his novel, sold exactly 47 copies according to his latest royalty statement, and gotten requests from 2 different literary agents who wanted to represent his next book. He should have been celebrating. Instead, he was planning to give up and take a job at an insurance company because he thought his wife had never supported his dreams. Sitting in our kitchen on that Tuesday morning in March, listening to the typewriter upstairs that would soon fall silent forever, I knew I had to make a choice. I could let Robert take that job and spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been. Or I could climb up to the attic, retrieve that shoebox, and finally tell him the truth about everything I'd done to support his dreams over the past 30 years. The sound of the typewriter stopped. A few minutes later, I heard Robert's footsteps on the stairs again, slower this time, heavier. He appeared in the kitchen doorway with a manila envelope in his hands. "I'm taking this to the post office," he said. "It's the last submission I'll ever make." I looked at the envelope, addressed to Sterling Literary Agency in New York, and felt my heart break a little more. Sterling was on my list of agencies to research for his next round of submissions. I'd already gathered information about their client list and submission guidelines, planning to help him get his work in front of them once I figured out how to do it without revealing my involvement. "What's in it?" I asked, though I already knew. "The full manuscript for Bridges in the Rain, along with a query for my next novel. Sarah Sterling is supposed to be one of the best agents for literary fiction." He paused, looking down at the envelope. "Though I suppose it doesn't matter. This is just a formality before I give up for good." He left for the post office, and I sat alone in our kitchen, surrounded by 45 years of memories and 30 years of secrets. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Patterson next door hanging laundry on her clothesline, and beyond that, the first green buds of spring were starting to appear on the oak tree that Robert and I had planted the year we moved into this house. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made over the years, all the extra shifts I'd worked, all the times I'd gone without so that Robert could have what he needed to pursue his writing. I thought about the stories of his that I'd read and loved, the characters he'd created that felt like real people to me, the beautiful sentences that I'd memorized and treasured. But mostly, I thought about the look in his eyes that morning when he talked about taking the insurance job. The resignation, the defeat, the sense that he was preparing to bury the most important part of himself because he believed the person who loved him most had never truly believed in him. I couldn't let that happen. Not when I had 30 years worth of proof that Robert Hayes was exactly the writer he'd always dreamed of being. When Robert returned from the post office, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my hands folded in front of me. He looked surprised to see me there, like he'd expected me to go about my normal Tuesday routine of laundry and grocery shopping and pretending that our conversation hadn't changed everything between us. "I need to show you something," I said. He frowned. "Margaret, if this is about the insurance job, I've already made up my mind. Jerry expects an answer by tonight, and I'm going to tell him yes. It's not about the job. Not exactly." I stood up, my knees protesting after sitting in the same position for over an hour. "I need you to come with me to the attic." "The attic? Why?" "Because there's something up there that I should have shown you a long time ago. Something that changes everything." Robert looked skeptical, but he followed me upstairs and waited while I pulled down the attic ladder. The space above our bedroom was cramped and dusty, filled with the accumulated debris of 4.5 decades of marriage. Christmas decorations, old furniture, boxes of photographs, and clothes that we'd kept meaning to donate to charity. I made my way to the far corner, past the artificial Christmas tree and the box of Robert's old baseball cards, to the place where I'd hidden my secret for 30 years. The shoebox was exactly where I'd left it, covered with a thin layer of dust but otherwise undisturbed. "What is this?" Robert asked as I carefully lifted the box and carried it toward the attic opening. "This," I said, my voice shaking with 3 decades of suppressed emotion, "is the reason you're not taking that job at Hartwell Insurance." We climbed back down to our bedroom, and I set the shoebox on our bed. Robert stared at it like it might explode. The box itself was nothing special, just an old shoe container from Montgomery Ward that had originally held a pair of winter boots I'd bought in 1993. But what was inside had the power to change everything between us. "For 30 years, I began, my hands trembling as I reached for the lid. "You've believed that I didn't support your writing. You've thought that I saw your novels and stories as nothing more than a hobby, something that was keeping you from being practical and responsible." Robert sat down heavily on the edge of our bed. "Margaret, what is this about?" I opened the shoebox. The first thing visible was a neat stack of acceptance letters, dozens of them, dating back to 1993. Underneath those were copies of literary magazines featuring Robert's stories, contest announcements listing him as a winner or finalist, and positive rejection letters from editors who had taken the time to write personal responses to his submissions. Robert's eyes widened as he recognized his own name on letter after letter. "I don't understand. Where did these come from?" I reached into the box and pulled out a thick folder. "These are copies of every submission I've made on your behalf over the past 30 years. Query letters, contest entries, manuscript submissions. All sent under your name. All funded with money I earned working extra shifts at the hospital." His face went white. "You've been submitting my work? Without telling me?" "I've been doing more than that." I pulled out another folder, this one containing financial records. "This is documentation of every writer's conference you've attended, every workshop you've taken, every piece of equipment or research material you've needed. The scholarship to the Chicago conference in 1998? I paid for that. The new computer when your old one crashed in 2005? I bought it and had your nephew deliver it as a surprise. The research trip to Maine for your historical novel? I worked double shifts for 3 months to pay for it." Robert was staring at the contents of the box like they were written in a foreign language. "But you always said we couldn't afford those things. You always told me to be realistic about my expectations." I sat down beside him on the bed, close enough that I could smell his familiar scent of coffee and aftershave. I said those things because I was afraid that if you knew what I was doing, you'd try to stop me. You've always been so proud, Robert. If you'd known I was working extra shifts to fund your writing career, you would have insisted that I stop. He picked up one of the acceptance letters, his hands shaking as he read it. This is from Nebraska Quarterly. They published my story, The Weight of Winter, in their 2001 issue, but I never submitted to Nebraska Quarterly. Yes, you did. I submitted it for you, and when they accepted it, I made sure you thought you'd forgotten about the submission. I reached into the box again and pulled out a contributor's copy of the magazine, opened to the page where his story appeared. I've saved every copy of every publication that's featured your work. You've been published 43 times in the past 30 years, Robert. 43 times. He flipped through the magazine, staring at his own name in print. I thought it was only a dozen or so publications. I thought most of my work was getting rejected. Most of it was getting rejected, but I kept submitting, kept trying new markets, kept believing that your work would find its audience. I pulled out another thick folder. These are all the rejections I received on your behalf. Personal rejections from editors who took the time to explain why your work didn't fit their particular publication, but encouraged me to try elsewhere. Robert was quiet for a long time, just sitting on our bed surrounded by 30 years of evidence that his writing career had been much more successful than he'd ever imagined. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Why didn't you tell me? The question I'd been dreading for 3 decades hung in the air between us. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind hundreds of times, but now that it was actually happening, I couldn't find the words I'd planned to say. At first, it was because I wanted to surprise you. That first acceptance from Prairie Voices, I thought. I'd tell you after the story was published, and you could see how wonderful it felt to have your work in print. I picked up the original issue of Prairie Voices, its pages now yellowed with age. But you were so happy when that acceptance letter arrived, so proud that someone wanted to publish your work, that I couldn't bring myself to take that away from you by admitting I'd submitted it myself. Robert turned the magazine over his hands looking at the cover as if seeing it for the first time. So you just kept going? I kept going because I could see how much your writing meant to you, and I could see how talented you were. Every story you wrote was better than the last one. Every novel showed growth and depth and genuine skill. But the publishing world is so competitive, and I knew that if I could just get your work in front of the right people, they'd recognize your talent too. I reached into the box one more time and pulled out a letter that I'd received just 3 days earlier. This came on Saturday while you were working in the garden. It's from Sarah Sterling. Robert's eyes widened. The agent I just sent my manuscript to? The same one. But she's not responding to the submission you mailed this morning. She's responding to the query I sent her 2 weeks ago. I handed him the letter. She wants to represent you, Robert. She's been following your work since that story you published in Meridian Review last year, and she thinks Bridges in the Rain is exactly the kind of literary fiction that publishers are looking for right now. He read the letter twice before setting it down on the bed between us. She wants to represent me based on work you submitted without my knowledge. She wants to represent you based on the quality of your writing. It doesn't matter who put the manuscript in front of her. What matters is that she recognized your talent and wants to help you build a career. Robert stood up and walked to our bedroom window, looking out at the backyard where we'd spent so many summer evenings talking about books and dreams and the future we wanted to build together. When he turned back to face me, there were tears in his eyes. For 30 years, I've thought you didn't believe in me. For 30 years, I've believed in you more than you believed in yourself. He sat back down on the bed and picked up another acceptance letter, this one from a literary contest he'd won in 2008. The Hemingway Prize. I remember getting this letter and being so excited that I wanted to call everyone we knew. But when I told you about it, You just said it was nice and changed the subject. I changed the subject because I was afraid I'd start crying and you'd ask why. I was so proud of you, Robert. I wanted to shout from the rooftops that my husband was a prize-winning author. But I couldn't do that without explaining how you'd ended up entering that particular contest. How did I end up entering it? I smiled, remembering the weeks of research I'd done to find the perfect contest for his story. I read about the Hemingway Prize in Writer's Digest and knew immediately that your story, Fishing for Memory, would be perfect for it. The entry fee was $50, which we couldn't really afford at the time, so I picked up an extra weekend shift and submitted it for you. Robert shook his head slowly. All these years I thought I was failing as a writer. I thought I was deluding myself about my abilities. You weren't failing. You were succeeding in ways you never knew about. I gestured to the shoebox, still half full of evidence. There are letters in here from editors who remember your work, contest judges who've seen your writing in multiple competitions, even a few fan letters that readers sent to magazines after your stories were published. Fan letters? I pulled out a small stack of handwritten notes. Mrs. Dorothy Chen from San Francisco wrote to tell you how much your story about the elderly man learning to use email reminded her of her late husband. James Rodriguez from Texas said your war story helped him understand some things about his grandfather's experience in Korea. There are a dozen letters like these, Robert. Real people whose lives were touched by your words. He read through the letters one by one, his expression cycling through amazement, joy, and something that looked like grief. Why are you showing me this now? Why not 10 years ago or 20? Because I was scared, I admitted. I was scared that if you knew what I'd been doing, you'd be angry that I'd gone behind your back. I was scared that you'd feel like your successes weren't really yours, because I'd helped make them happen. And I was scared that if you knew how much money I'd spent supporting your writing over the years, you'd feel guilty and stop pursuing your dreams. Robert was quiet for a long time, just holding the fan letters and staring at the evidence of a writing career he'd never known he had. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Margaret, do you have any idea what these past few years have been like for me? Thinking that my own wife saw my writing as nothing more than an expensive hobby? Believing that the person I loved most in the world thought I was wasting my time and our money chasing an impossible dream? The pain in his voice broke my heart. I never thought that. Not once, not ever. But you let me believe it. You sat there while I talked about giving up, while I convinced myself that I wasn't good enough, while I decided to take a job I'd hate because I thought you wanted me to be practical instead of creative. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Robert, I was trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From knowing that my wife loved me enough to work extra shifts for 30 years to support my dreams? From understanding that I was more successful as a writer than I'd ever imagined? From feeling proud of accomplishments that I'd actually earned through my own talent and hard work? When he put it like that, I could see how wrong I'd been. In trying to protect him from the knowledge of my secret support, I'd protected him from the joy of knowing he was truly successful. I'd protected him from understanding how much I believed in him. I'd protected him from the confidence that might have made him an even better writer. I made a mistake, I said quietly. A mistake that lasted 30 years. Robert picked up his published novel, the one that had arrived 3 months earlier, and held it in his hands. When this came in the mail, I wanted to celebrate. I wanted to take you out to dinner and toast to all the years of work that had finally paid off. But you called it a nice hobby project, and I felt like such a fool for thinking it was important. It is important. It's the most important thing in the world to me, because it's the most important thing in the world to you. He looked at me then, really looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. Then why couldn't you just tell me that? I didn't have a good answer for that question. Or maybe I had too many answers, all of them tangled up with fear and pride and the kind of love that makes you do stupid things with good intentions. I don't know, I said finally. I honestly don't know. Robert set the novel down and picked up another document from the shoebox. It was a letter from Millfield Press, his publisher, asking if he had any other manuscripts they could consider for future publication. They want to see more of my work, he said, sounding surprised. They've wanted to see more of your work for 6 months. That letter is from last September. I've been corresponding with them under your name, sending them sample chapters from your new novel and discussing possible publication timelines. His eyes widened. My new novel isn't finished yet. I know, but I've been reading the chapters as you complete them, and I knew they were good enough to interest a publisher. So I sent them the first 3 chapters along with a synopsis of the rest of the story. You've been reading my work in progress? I nodded, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. I sneak into your study late at night, after you've gone to bed, and read whatever you've written that day. I've been doing it for years. And what do you think of the new novel? For 30 years, I'd hidden my opinions about Robert's writing, pretending to be disinterested when I was actually his most devoted reader. Now, finally given permission to be honest, I found myself struggling to find words big enough for what I felt. I think it's the best thing you've ever written, I said. I think the character of Daniel is so real that I worry about him when I'm not reading. I think the way you've structured the timeline is brilliant, and the themes about forgiveness and second chances are going to resonate with a lot of readers. I think any publisher would be lucky to have it, and any reader would be lucky to experience it. Robert stared at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. You really think that? I've thought that about everything you've written for the past 43 years. I've just been too afraid to tell you. He reached into the shoebox and pulled out a thick manuscript. I recognized it immediately as his first novel, the one that had started everything, the one I'd submitted to 20 publishers back in 1993. This was never published, he said. No, but it was close several times. Meridian Books held on to it for 8 months before deciding it wasn't quite right for their list. Brookstone Publishing asked for revisions and held it for another 6 months before ultimately passing. But the rejection letters were all encouraging, all full of praise for your voice and storytelling ability. I pulled out a folder of rejection, letters for that first novel, each one more personal and encouraging than the last. These aren't form rejections, Robert. These are letters from editors who took the time to explain why they couldn't publish your book, but wanted to encourage you to keep writing. He read through the letters, shaking his head in amazement. I thought this novel was a complete failure. I thought it proved that I didn't have what it takes to be a real writer. It proved exactly the opposite. It proved that you had natural talent that was worth developing, a voice that was worth hearing, stories that were worth telling. That's why I kept submitting your work, even when you got discouraged. That's why I kept believing in you, even when you stopped believing in yourself. Robert set the letters down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I nodded, bracing myself for whatever question was coming. Do you actually like my writing? Or have you been supporting it all these years just because you love me? The question caught me off guard, even though I probably should have expected it. After 30 years of pretending to be disinterested in his work, how could he know that my support came from genuine appreciation rather than marital obligation? I love your writing, I said simply. I love the way you create characters that feel like real people with real problems and real hopes. I love the way you can describe a sunset so beautifully that I can see it in my mind, even when I'm reading. Your words on a cloudy day. I love the way your dialogue sounds like real people talking, not like a writer trying to show off how clever he is. I love the quiet moments in your stories just as much as the dramatic ones, because you understand that life is made up of both. I reached into the shoebox and pulled out a worn paperback copy of a literary magazine from 1997. This story you wrote about the old man teaching his grandson to fish? I've read it probably 50 times. I keep this copy in my purse and read it whenever I'm having a difficult day at work, because it reminds me that there's still beauty and tenderness in the world. Robert took the magazine from my hands, his fingers tracing over the cover that had been worn soft from handling. You carry this with you? I carry pieces of your writing with me everywhere. In my purse, in my car, in my locker at the hospital. When Mrs. Henderson in room 304 was dying last month and her family couldn't get there in time, I read her your story about the woman saying goodbye to her garden. It gave her peace in her final hours. His eyes filled with tears. You read my stories to your patients. When it seems like it might help them, your words have comforted more people than you know, Robert. There was a young man who came into the emergency room after a car accident, scared and alone, and I read him your story about finding courage in unexpected places. There was a woman whose husband had Alzheimer's, and your story about memory and love helped her understand that love doesn't disappear even when memory does. Robert was quiet for a long time, just holding that worn magazine and thinking about his words being shared with strangers in their darkest moments. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. All these years, I thought my writing didn't matter to anyone except me. Your writing matters to me more than you'll ever know. It matters to the editors who published your stories, to the contest judges who recognized your talent, to the readers who wrote those fan letters, and to the patients I've cared for who found comfort in your words. I gestured to the shoebox, still half full of documents. This box isn't just evidence of your success as a writer. It's evidence of the difference your words have made in the world. Robert stood up again and walked to our dresser, where he kept the few copies of magazines that had published his work over the years. He picked up one of them and opened it to his story, reading his own words as if seeing them for the first time. When I got that job offer from Jerry at Hartwell Insurance, I almost called him right away to accept. The only thing that stopped me was thinking about this story. He held up the magazine. I kept reading this paragraph where the main character talks about the dreams he gave up, and I realized I didn't want to become that character. You don't have to become that character. You have options now that you didn't know about this morning. He set the magazine down and turned to face me. Margaret, I need to understand something. When I submitted that manuscript to Sarah Sterling this morning, was I wasting my time? Had you already sent her the same material? I sent her a query letter and the first 3 chapters 2 weeks ago. But a full manuscript submission shows a different kind of commitment. She'll appreciate having the complete novel to review, especially now that she's expressed interest in representing you. So, my submission this morning wasn't completely pointless? Nothing you've done as a writer has been pointless. Every story you've written, every submission you've made, every hour you've spent developing your craft, it's all been building toward something. The only difference is that I've been helping more than you knew about. Robert sat back down on the bed and picked up the letter from Sarah Sterling again. She really wants to represent me? She really wants to represent you. And she's not the only one. I reached into the shoebox and pulled out 2 more letters. These are from agents who contacted me after reading your stories in various magazines. They've all expressed interest in seeing your novel. His hands were shaking as he read the letters. 3 agents want to see my work? 3 agents want to see your work because it's good enough to build a career on. That's what I've been trying to tell you for 30 years, just not with words. Why not with words, Margaret? Why couldn't you just tell me that you thought I was talented? It was the question I'd been asking myself for 3 decades, and I still didn't have a satisfactory answer. I think I was afraid that if I said how much I loved your writing, it would sound like empty praise from a wife who was just trying to be supportive. I wanted your validation to come from the publishing world, from objective sources who had no reason to lie to you about your abilities. But you were supporting me the whole time anyway. You were just doing it secretly. I was doing it secretly because I thought that's what you needed. I thought that if your successes felt entirely earned by your own efforts, they would mean more to you. Robert laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do you know what would have meant more to me? Knowing that my wife read my work and found it meaningful. Knowing that the person I loved most in the world actually enjoyed the stories I was creating. Knowing that when I spent hours struggling with a difficult scene, someone I cared about would notice and appreciate the result. The pain in his voice was unbearable. I'd spent 30 years trying to give him the perfect gift of independent success. And instead, I'd given him the terrible gift of feeling unloved and unsupported by the person whose opinion mattered most. Robert, I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry for the loneliness I caused you. I don't want apologies right now, Margaret. I want to understand how we got to this place. I want to know how two people who love each other could misunderstand each other so completely for so long. I looked around our bedroom, at the shoebox full of secrets spread across our bed, at the evidence of 3 decades of deception with good intentions. How do you explain a love so fierce that it makes you lie? To protect someone's dreams? How do you describe the fear that honesty might somehow diminish the thing you're trying to nurture? I think it started with the best intentions and grew into something I didn't know how to stop, I said finally. Every year, the secret got bigger and harder to reveal. Every success you had made me more afraid of taking credit for any part of it. Every time you doubted yourself, I wanted to show you this box. But I was terrified that knowing about my involvement would make you question whether your achievements were really yours. Robert picked up one of the contest certificates, a third-place award for a story he'd written about a couple celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. This story was inspired by us, you know, by watching you take care of your mother during her final illness, by seeing how gentle and patient you were with her even when she was difficult. I remembered that story well. I'd cried when I read it, not just because it was beautiful, but because I could see how closely Robert had been watching me during that difficult time, how deeply he'd understood the complexity of love and duty and grief that I'd been struggling with. I didn't know that, I said softly. I never told you because I thought you'd be embarrassed to know I was using our life as material for my fiction. But the truth is, Margaret, you've been inspiring my writing for 43 years, not just financially, as it turns out, but emotionally and creatively. The love story in my novel, Bridges in the Rain, that's us. The way Elena supports David's dreams even when she's scared he'll fail, that's you. I felt tears starting in my eyes. I've read that novel a dozen times, and I never realized. You never realized because I never told you. Just like, I never realized how much you were supporting my career because you never told me. He looked at me with an expression that was equal parts love and frustration. We've been married for 45 years, and we've apparently never learned how to talk to each other about the things that matter most. The truth of that statement hit me like a physical blow. We'd built a life together, raised our children, weathered financial struggles and health scares and family tragedies, but we'd never learned how to be completely honest with each other about our deepest fears and greatest loves. What do we do now? I asked. Robert was quiet for a long time, looking through the contents of the shoebox like he was trying to memorize everything it contained. When he finally answered, his voice was thoughtful and sad. I don't know. I honestly don't know how we move forward from here. Do you want me to call Jerry and tell him you've changed your mind about the insurance job? The insurance job was never really about needing work, Margaret. It was about feeling like a failure as a writer and needing to do something practical to justify my existence. Now I find out that I haven't been failing at all, that I've actually been more successful than I ever imagined. He picked up the letter from Sarah Sterling again. But I also find out that my wife has been living a double life for 30 years, that every conversation we've had about my writing has been built on deception. The word deception hung in the air between us like a judgment. Is that what I'd been doing all these years? Deceiving him? Or had I been loving him in the only way I knew how? I never meant to deceive you, Robert. I meant to help you. I know that. I know your intentions were good, but intentions don't change the fact that for 30 years, you've known things about my writing career that I didn't know. You've been making decisions about my work without consulting me. You've been living with the knowledge that I was successful while watching me believe I was a failure. I wanted to argue with him, to defend my choices, to explain again why I'd thought secrecy was necessary. But looking at the evidence spread across our bed, I could see how controlling my love had been. I'd taken away his right to know about his own successes. I'd stolen his chance to feel proud of his accomplishments in real time. I'd made myself the secret manager of his career instead of being his partner in it. You're right, I said quietly. I took away your agency as a writer. I made decisions that should have been yours to make. The worst part is that I spent years feeling guilty about the time and money I thought I was wasting on my writing. I felt like I was being selfish, pursuing my dreams at your expense, taking resources away from our family for something that wasn't producing results. His voice broke slightly. Do you know how many times I almost quit writing because I thought it was hurting you? I did know, because I'd watched him struggle with that guilt over and over again. I'd seen him start to put his typewriter away, seen him consider taking that insurance job or another practical position that would bring in steady money. And every time, I'd found a way to create a small success for him, a publication or contest win that would renew his faith in his abilities just enough to keep him going. I saw you struggling with that guilt, I admitted. That's part of why I kept submitting your work and funding your writing activities. I was trying to take away the financial pressure so you could focus on the creative work. But you were also taking away my right to make informed decisions about my own life. If I'd known that my writing was actually generating income and recognition, I might have pursued it more aggressively. I might have spent more time on it, or taken different risks, or approached it as a real career instead of an expensive hobby. That was a possibility I'd never considered. In trying to protect Robert from the pressure of knowing about the financial investment I was making in his career, I'd also protected him from the confidence that might have made him a more ambitious writer. Would you have wanted to know? I asked. If I could go back 30 years and do it differently, would you have wanted me to tell you about every submission, every expense, every small success? Robert thought about that for a long time. I think I would have wanted us to be partners in it. I would have wanted to make those decisions together, to celebrate the successes together, to strategize about submissions and contests and career development together. But you were so proud, Robert. You would never have let me work extra shifts to pay for writing conferences and contests if you'd known that's what I was doing. You're right, I wouldn't have. But maybe we could have found other ways to make it work. Maybe I could have taken on freelance editing or tutoring to earn money specifically for writing expenses. Maybe we could have budgeted differently, or applied for grants, or found other sources of funding that didn't require you to work yourself to exhaustion. I'd never thought of those possibilities because I'd been so focused on protecting Robert from having to worry about the financial aspects of his writing career. But he was right that there might have been other solutions, collaborative solutions. That would have made us partners instead of making me a secret benefactor. I think I was scared that if we talked about the money, it would make your writing feel like work instead of art, I said. But writing is work, Margaret. Good writing requires discipline and time and resources, just like any other serious pursuit. By hiding the financial reality from me, you were treating my writing like a fantasy instead of a profession. That insight hit me hard. I'd thought I was protecting the purity of Robert's creative process, but I'd actually been infantilizing him treating him like someone who couldn't handle the practical realities of a writing career. "I made a lot of mistakes," I said. "We both made mistakes. I should have insisted on more honest communication about your feelings regarding my writing. I should have asked you directly whether you read my work and what you thought of it instead of just assuming you weren't interested." Robert picked up another document from the shoebox, this one a review of his novel from a literary blog I'd found online. The reviewer had called his work quietly powerful and compared his style to authors whose names I recognized from the bestseller lists. Someone wrote a review of my book? Several people wrote reviews of your book. That's just one of them. I reached into the box and pulled out a folder containing printouts of every review I'd found. Most of them were positive. A few were neutral. One was negative, but still acknowledged the quality of your prose. He read through the reviews with growing amazement. "People are actually reading my book and talking about it online? People are reading your book and talking about it because it's worth reading and talking about. That's what I've been trying to tell you, Robert. You're not a failed writer pursuing an impossible dream. You're a successful writer who just didn't know how successful he was. But success that you orchestrated without my knowledge. Success that I can't entirely claim as my own." I understood his conflict. How do you take pride in achievements when you discover that someone else was working behind the scenes to make them possible? How do you trust your own abilities when you learn that some of your opportunities were created rather than earned? "Your talent is entirely your own," I said firmly. "I never wrote a single word for you, Robert. I never revised your stories or improved your prose or created your characters. All I did was put your work in front of people who could appreciate it. The writing itself, the creativity, the skill, the voice that makes your stories worth reading. That's all you. But the opportunities. The opportunities were just opportunities. You still had to write well enough to take advantage of them. Do you think contest judges gave you awards because I submitted your stories? Do you think editors published your work because I sent it to them? They responded to the quality of your writing, not to anything I did." Robert set the reviews down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You really believe that?" "I know that. I've read enough rejection letters over the years to understand that editors and agents don't publish work just to be nice. They publish work that meets their standards, that fits their vision, that serves their readers. Your work met those criteria 43 times over 30 years. That's not luck or charity. That's talent." He was quiet for a while, processing everything I'd told him. Outside our bedroom window, I could hear the neighbor's dog barking and the distant sound of traffic on Maple Street. Normal sounds of a normal Tuesday afternoon in a life that would never be normal again. "Margaret, I need to ask you something else, and I need you to be completely honest." I nodded, though I was afraid of what he might ask. "Do you regret it? Do you regret spending 30 years and thousands of dollars supporting my writing career in secret?" The question surprised me. Of all the things he might have asked, that wasn't one I'd expected. "No," I said without hesitation. "I don't regret a single dollar or a single hour. Watching you create those stories, seeing your work get published and recognized, knowing that your words have touched people's lives, it's been the greatest privilege of my life. I only regret that I did it in a way that made you feel unloved and unsupported. But you gave up so much. All those extra shifts at the hospital, all the things you didn't buy for yourself so that money could go to my writing expenses. Don't you feel like you sacrificed too much?" I thought about all the hours I'd spent working overtime, all the times I'd bought myself nothing so Robert could have what he needed for a conference or contest submission. Had it felt like sacrifice? It never felt like sacrifice because I was investing in something I believed in. Your writing wasn't just your dream, Robert. It was our dream. I was as invested in your success as you were. Maybe more so because I could see your talent more clearly than you could. But what about your own dreams? What about the things you wanted for yourself? That question caught me off guard. What had I wanted for myself? For 30 years, I'd been so focused on Robert's writing career that I'd barely thought about my own ambitions and desires. I wanted you to be happy, I said finally. I wanted you to fulfill your potential as a writer. I wanted to grow old with a man who felt proud of his accomplishments instead of bitter about his failures. Those weren't sacrifices, Robert. Those were investments in the life I wanted us to have together. But surely you had other dreams, career goals, personal interests, things you wanted to pursue for yourself. I tried to think back to the woman I'd been 30 years ago, before Robert's writing career became the organizing principle of my life. Had there been things I'd wanted for myself? I thought about going back to school at one point, I said slowly. Getting my master's degree in nursing, maybe becoming a nurse practitioner. But the tuition would have taken money away from your writing expenses, and it seemed more important to support your dreams than to pursue new ones of my own. Robert's face fell. Margaret, you gave up graduate school for my writing career? I postponed graduate school. There's a difference. Is there? When did you plan to go back to school? When I became successful enough that you didn't need to fund my career anymore? I didn't have an answer for that because I'd never actually planned to go back to school. Somewhere along the way, supporting Robert's writing had become my purpose, my identity, my own form of creative expression. I'd found meaning in being the invisible force behind his success. I found fulfillment in supporting your work, I said. It didn't feel like I was giving up my own dreams. It felt like I was living them through you. That's not the same thing, and you know it. He was right, but I wasn't sure it mattered anymore. I was 72 years old. The time for graduate school and career changes had long passed. What mattered now was figuring out how to move forward, with our marriage after 30 years of fundamental dishonesty. Robert, I can't change the choices I made. I can only try to make better choices going forward, and I can promise you that from now on, we'll be partners in your writing career. Instead of me being a secret manager of it. Will we? Because I'm not sure I know how to trust your judgment about my writing anymore. For 30 years, you've been telling me that my work is good while pretending not to care about it. How do I know when you're being honest with me and when you're managing my emotions? That was a fair question, and one I didn't have a good answer for. How do you rebuild trust after 30 years of deception, even deception with good intentions? I guess you'll have to watch what I do instead of just listening to what I say, I said. And I'll have to learn how to be honest about my feelings, instead of hiding them to protect yours. Robert picked up the acceptance letter from Prairie Voices, the one that had started everything 30 years ago. This story was about a man who thought he was alone in the world until he discovered that someone had been looking out for him all along. I never realized how autobiographical it was. I remembered that story well. It was about a homeless veteran who discovered that a stranger had been anonymously paying for his meals at a local diner for months. The story ended with the veteran and his benefactor finally meeting and becoming friends. Maybe that's how this ends too, I said hopefully. Maybe we finally meet each other as we really are instead of as we thought we were. Maybe. But it's going to take time, Margaret. I need time to process everything you've told me today. I need time to figure out how I feel about my writing career now that I know the truth about it. And I need time to decide whether I can forgive you for keeping this secret for so long. The word forgive hit me like a punch to the stomach. I'd never thought of my actions as something that would require forgiveness. I'd thought of them as acts of love. I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I really did understand how we'd gotten to a place where love looked so much like betrayal. Robert stood up and began putting the documents back into the shoebox. As he worked, he spoke without looking at me. I'm going to call Jerry and tell him I'm not taking the insurance job. And I'm going to respond to Sarah Sterling's letter and set up a phone call to discuss representation. But I need you to know that I'm doing those things because of what I learned about my own abilities today, not because you think I should. I understand. And I need you to promise me that from now on, you'll tell me the truth about everything related to my writing. No more secret submissions, no more hidden expenses, no more managing my career without my knowledge. I promise. Even if you think the truth will hurt my feelings or discourage me from writing. Even then. He closed the shoebox and set it on our dresser, next to the magazines that contained his published stories. I'm going to go for a walk. I need some time to think about everything. I watched him leave our bedroom and listened to his footsteps on the stairs. A few minutes later, I heard the front door close and saw him walking down Maple Street with his hands in his pockets and his head down, looking like a man trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly become unfamiliar. I sat alone in our bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of 30 years of secret love, and wondered if I'd saved Robert's writing career only to destroy our marriage. Had my deception been an act of love or an act of control? Had I been protecting his dreams or stealing his agency? Had I been the best wife I knew how to be, or the worst kind of partner, one who loved so fiercely that she forgot to trust the person she claimed to love? Outside our window, spring was beginning to assert itself. The oak tree that Robert and I had planted when we first moved to this house was showing its first green buds, and Mrs. Patterson next door was working in her garden, preparing the soil for another season of growth. Life was renewing itself all around us, but inside our house, everything felt suspended, waiting for some kind of resolution that might never come. I picked up the letter from Sarah Sterling and read it again, trying to see it through Robert's eyes. She wanted to represent him based on the quality of his writing, not because of anything I'd done. His talent was real, his success was earned, his dreams were worth pursuing. Maybe that would be enough to build on. Maybe love could learn to look like partnership instead of secrecy. Or maybe some betrayals, even loving ones, cut too deep to heal completely. Maybe trust, once broken, stayed broken forever, no matter how good the intentions behind the breaking had been. I didn't know. After 45 years of marriage and 30 years of secret love, I didn't know anything for certain except that Robert Hayes was a gifted writer whose words deserved to be read by the world, and that I'd loved him enough to spend 3 decades of my life making sure that happened, even if he never knew about it. Whether that love had been enough or too much or completely wrong remained to be seen. Robert didn't come home until after dark. I'd spent the afternoon alternating between cleaning the kitchen with unnecessary thoroughness and sitting at our table staring at the phone, wondering if I should call our daughter Emma to tell her what had happened. Emma lived in Portland with her husband and twin boys, and she called us every Sunday evening to catch up on our week. She'd always known that her father was a writer, had grown up watching him work at his typewriter in the evenings, had even read some of his published stories over the years. But she had no idea about the secret life I'd been living, the elaborate deception that had shaped our family's financial decisions for her entire adult life. When Robert finally walked through the front door, his cheeks were red from the cold and his hair was disheveled from the wind. He hung his coat in the closet and came into the kitchen where I was pretending to read a magazine while really just turning pages randomly and waiting for him to return. "I walked all the way to Riverside Park and back," he said, pulling out the chair across from me at our table. "I sat on that bench by the pond where we used to take Emma when she was little, and I tried to figure out how I feel about everything you told me today." I set down the magazine and folded my hands in front of me, trying to prepare myself for whatever he might say. During the hours he'd been gone, I'd imagined dozens of possible outcomes to our conversation. Some ended with forgiveness and a new understanding between us. Others ended with Robert packing a suitcase and moving into the spare bedroom at his brother's house until he could figure out what he wanted to do about our marriage. "What did you decide?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Robert was quiet for a long moment, looking around our kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. His gaze lingered on the small desk in the corner where I paid our bills and kept our household records, the place where I'd secretly managed the financial side of his writing career for 3 decades without him ever knowing. "I decided that I'm angry," he said finally. "I'm angry that you didn't trust me enough to be honest with me. I'm angry that you made decisions about my career without consulting me. I'm angry that you let me believe I was failing when you knew I was succeeding. And I'm angry that you sacrificed your own dreams to support mine without giving me the chance to support yours in return." Each word felt like a small stone thrown at my chest. I'd expected anger, but hearing it expressed so clearly and calmly somehow made it worse than if he'd shouted at me. "I understand why you're angry," I said. "But I'm also grateful," he continued. And that surprised me. "I'm grateful that you believed in my writing when I didn't believe in it myself. I'm grateful that you worked extra shifts and went without things so that I could pursue my dreams. I'm grateful that you kept every acceptance letter and every positive review, that you created a record of my success even when I was too discouraged to keep track of it myself." I felt tears starting in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I'd cried enough for one day. "And I'm confused," Robert said. "I'm confused about which of my feelings are justified and which ones are selfish. I'm confused about whether I should be proud of my accomplishments or ashamed that I didn't earn them, entirely on my own. I'm confused about whether you're the most loving wife in the world or someone who's been controlling my life in ways I never understood." "Maybe I'm both," I said quietly. "Maybe you are. Maybe love and control look more similar than either of us realized." Robert reached across the table and picked up my hand, the first physical contact we'd had since our confrontation that morning. His fingers were cold from his long walk, but his touch was gentle. "Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." I nodded, squeezing his hand. "If you could go back 30 years and do everything differently, what would you change?" It was a question I'd been asking myself all afternoon, and I still wasn't sure I had a good answer. Would I have been completely honest with Robert from the beginning, even if it meant watching him struggle with financial stress and self-doubt? Would I have found ways to support his writing that didn't require secrecy? Would I have pursued my own dreams while supporting his? "I would have made us partners in your writing career from the beginning," I said slowly. "I would have told you when I submitted your work, and we would have celebrated the acceptances together and mourned the rejections together. I would have been honest about working extra shifts to fund your writing expenses, and I would have let you decide whether that was something you were comfortable with. What about your own dreams? What about graduate school? I would have found a way to pursue those too, instead of making your success my only source of fulfillment. We could have supported each other's ambitions instead of me secretly supporting yours while neglecting my own." Robert nodded slowly. "That sounds like a better marriage than the one we actually had." The sadness in his voice broke my heart. Had our marriage really been that flawed? Had my love really been that misguided? "But we can't go back," I said. "We can only decide what to do from here." "You're right. So what do we do from here, Margaret? How do we build a marriage based on honesty after 45 years of secrecy?" I didn't have an answer for that question either. How do you learn new ways of loving when you're 72 years old? How do you rebuild trust when the foundation has been shaken so fundamentally? "Maybe we start by making different choices tomorrow than we made yesterday," I said. "Maybe we start by talking about your writing like the real partnership we should have been all along." Robert released my hand and leaned back in his chair. "Speaking of my writing, I called Sarah Sterling this afternoon, from the phone booth at Riverside Park." My heart started racing. "What did she say?" "She said exactly what her letter indicated. She's been following my work for the past year, ever since she read my story in Meridian Review. She thinks my novel has commercial potential, and she wants to submit it to publishers who specialize in literary fiction. I wanted to ask a dozen questions about the conversation, but I forced myself to wait for Robert to tell me whatever he wanted to share. This was his career, his decision, his conversation to relate or not relate as he chose. She also asked me about my writing process, about how long it typically takes me to complete a novel, about whether I have other completed manuscripts. Robert paused, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I told her I'd have to get back to her about some of those questions because I wasn't entirely sure of the answers. What do you mean? I mean that apparently I've been more productive over the past 30 years than I realized. According to that box upstairs, I've completed 9 novels and had portions of several of them published in literary magazines. But I stopped keeping track of my longer works after the first few rejections, so I don't have a clear sense of what's available for submission. I understood what he was asking, even though he hadn't asked it directly. Would you like me to help you create an inventory of your completed manuscripts? Would you be willing to do that? To help me organize my body of work so I can make informed decisions about which pieces to prioritize? It was a small step toward partnership, but it felt huge to me. For the first time in 30 years, Robert was asking for my help openly, instead of receiving it secretly. Of course I'd be willing to help. I have detailed records of everything you've written, everything you've published, and everything that's currently in circulation. You kept records of everything? I kept records of everything. Publication dates, submission histories, contest entries, editor responses. I have 30 years of data about your writing career that you've never seen. Robert shook his head in amazement. You essentially kept a business manager's records for a business I didn't know I was running. Something like that. And you never once considered telling me about those records? Even when I was feeling discouraged about my lack of progress? I thought about all the times I'd watched Robert struggle with self-doubt. All the occasions when I could have shown him proof of his success and chosen not to. I was always planning to tell you eventually. I thought maybe when you got your first book deal, or when you reached some milestone that would make it clear your career was viable. But the right moment never seemed to come. The right moment would have been 30 years ago, Margaret. You're right. The right moment would have been 30 years ago. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the magnitude of the change that had occurred in our relationship in a single day. This morning, Robert had been planning to give up writing and take a job at an insurance company. Tonight, he was planning to work with a literary agent to build the writing career he'd always dreamed of. This morning, I'd been the keeper of secrets that were eating me alive from the inside. Tonight, I was facing the possibility of finally being honest with my husband about the most important thing in both our lives. Margaret, I want to see those records you kept. I want to understand the scope of what you did, and I want to use that information to make smart decisions about my career going forward. The records are in my desk upstairs. I can show them to you tomorrow morning if you'd like. I'd like that. And I want you to help me respond to Sarah Sterling's questions about my manuscripts and my productivity. I want us to work together to give her the information she needs to represent me effectively. It was more partnership than I'd dared to hope for. Are you sure you want my help? After everything I've done without your permission? Robert considered that question carefully. I'm sure I want your help. I'm not sure yet whether I can trust your judgment, but I'm sure I want your help. We'll have to figure out the trust part as we go. That seems fair. There's something else I want you to help me with if you're willing. What's that? I want you to help me understand which of my successes were earned through my own efforts and which ones happened because of your behind-the-scenes work. I need to know the difference so I can feel confident about my abilities going forward. It was a reasonable request, but a complicated one. How do you separate natural talent from created opportunities? How do you measure the value of writing ability versus the value of strategic submission? I can show you exactly what I did and didn't do, I said. But Robert, I need you to understand that I never influenced the content of your writing or the quality of your work. I just helped connect your work with people who could appreciate it. I know that intellectually, but emotionally, I'm struggling to feel ownership of my accomplishments. When I look at that acceptance letter from Prairie Voices, I don't see evidence of my talent anymore. I see evidence of your secret campaign to promote my career. That was the worst possible outcome of my revelation, and one I hadn't fully anticipated. In trying to give Robert the gift of success, I'd accidentally taken away his ability to feel proud of that success. Robert, editors and contest judges don't publish work or give awards just to be nice. They respond to quality. Your work was published 43 times because it was good enough to be published 43 times. But it was published 43 times by editors who might never have seen it if you hadn't submitted it. How do I know whether my work would have found an audience on its own? I didn't have an answer for that question because it was impossible. To know what would have happened in an alternate timeline where I hadn't intervened. Maybe Robert would have been just as successful submitting his own work. Maybe he would have been more successful, approaching his career with more confidence and strategic thinking, or maybe he would have given up after the first few rejections and never published anything at all. I don't think it matters whether your work would have found an audience on its own, I said finally. What matters is that it did find an audience, and that audience responded positively to the quality of your writing. But how do I build confidence in my abilities when I don't know which opportunities were earned versus created? It was a question that didn't have a clean answer, and I was beginning to understand that my 30 years of secret support might have solved one problem while creating another. I'd protected Robert from the discouragement of rejection, but I'd also protected him from the confidence that comes with earning success through your own efforts. Maybe you build confidence by moving forward, I suggested. Maybe you work with Sarah Sterling to submit your novels to publishers, and you see how they respond to work that you know you submitted yourself. That could take years. It could. But you have years, Robert. You're 68 years old, not 98. You have time to build the kind of career confidence that comes from knowing you earned every opportunity. Robert nodded slowly. You're right. I can't change the past, but I can control how I approach the future. And I can support that future in ways that are honest and collaborative instead of secret and controlling. Can you? Are you sure you know how to do that after 30 years of managing my career behind the scenes? It was a fair question. I'd become so accustomed to solving Robert's problems without his knowledge that I wasn't sure I knew how to be a transparent partner in his success. I'll have to learn how to do it. Just like you'll have to learn how to trust my support when it's offered openly instead of provided secretly. I suppose we'll both be learning new ways of being married to each other. That thought was both exciting and terrifying. After 45 years together, we were going to have to figure out how to love each other differently. We were going to have to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of secrecy, partnership instead of hidden caretaking. Robert, there's something else I need to tell you. He looked at me with alarm. More secrets? Not exactly. More like a confession about something I've been thinking about all afternoon. What kind of confession? I took a deep breath, gathering courage for what I needed to say. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about me giving up my own dreams to support yours. And I realized that somewhere along the way, supporting your writing career became my dream. It became the thing I was most passionate about, the thing that gave my life meaning and purpose. Robert frowned. Margaret, that's not healthy. You can't live your life entirely through someone else's accomplishments. I know that now. But for 30 years, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. It felt like love. It was love. but it was also a way of avoiding the risks that come with pursuing your own dreams. It was safer to invest in my success than to risk your own failure. The observation stung because it was probably true. Had I hidden behind Robert's dreams because I was afraid of failing at my own? Had I made myself indispensable to his career because it was easier than building my own? Maybe you're right. Maybe supporting your writing was a way of feeling important without having to test my own abilities. What were you afraid of failing at, Margaret? I thought about the woman I'd been 30 years ago, the nurse who'd considered going back to school, who'd thought about pursuing advanced degrees and specialized certifications. What had stopped me from following through on those plans? I was afraid of not being smart enough for graduate school. I was afraid of taking time and money away from our family for something that might not pan out. I was afraid of being selfish. But you weren't afraid of working extra shifts for years to fund my writing career. That didn't feel selfish. That felt like love. And pursuing your own education wouldn't have been love? Love for yourself. Love for our family. Love for the patients you could have helped with advanced training. Robert was right, and I'd never thought about it that way before. I'd seen my own ambitions as selfish and Robert's dreams as worthy. I'd made his success the measure of our family's value while treating my own potential as expendable. I was afraid that if I pursued my own dreams and failed, it would prove that I wasn't as capable as I wanted to believe. But if I supported your dreams and they succeeded, I could feel capable without risking disappointment. So, in a way, my writing career became your safety net. I suppose it did. And now that we're talking about building a more honest marriage, you're going to have to figure out what you want for yourself instead of just what you want for me. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. At 72, what did I want for myself? Was it too late to pursue the dreams I'd set aside decades ago? Was it too late to discover new dreams I'd never allowed myself to consider? I don't know what I want for myself, Robert. I've been so focused on your career for so long that I'm not sure I remember how to think about my own interests and ambitions. Then maybe that's where we start. Maybe we start by figuring out what Margaret Hayes wants to do with the rest of her life, independent of what Robert Hayes wants to do with his. It was a radical idea, almost revolutionary after 30 years of defining myself primarily as Robert's supportive wife. Who was I when I wasn't managing his career in secret? Who was I when my identity wasn't tied to his success? That sounds frightening, I admitted. It sounds frightening to me, too. For 30 years, I've gotten to focus entirely on my writing, because I thought you weren't particularly interested in pursuing anything else. If you start having your own dreams and goals, I'll have to learn how to be a supportive husband instead of just a supported one. Are you willing to learn that? I want to be willing to learn that. I think a marriage where we both have dreams and both support each other's dreams would be stronger than what we've had. I thought about what that might look like. Robert, working on his novels while I pursued my own interests, whatever those might turn out to be. Both of us celebrating each other's successes and offering comfort during disappointments. Both of us contributing financially and emotionally to the family dreams instead of me secretly carrying the financial burden while he carried the creative one. It would be a completely different marriage than the one we've had, I said. Maybe that's what we need. Maybe the marriage we've had, as much as we've loved each other, hasn't been entirely healthy for either of us. It was a hard truth to acknowledge, but probably an important one. We'd built a life together based on unspoken assumptions and unexpressed needs. We'd loved each other deeply, but not necessarily wisely. We'd been partners in some ways, but not in the ways that mattered most. So what do we do tomorrow? I asked. How do we start building this different kind of marriage? Robert was quiet for a moment, thinking. Tomorrow, I think we start by looking at those records you kept together. We figure out the scope of My writing career as it actually exists, not as I thought it existed. We make a plan for working with Sarah Sterling and for submitting my other manuscripts to publishers. And then? And then we figure out what you want to do with your life besides support mine. We talk about your interests, your postponed dreams, your current curiosities. We make a plan for your goals the same way we're making a plan for mine. The idea was both thrilling and overwhelming. After 30 years of focusing exclusively on Robert's dreams, the thought of having my own dreams felt almost selfish. But maybe that was exactly what I needed to learn how to do. Maybe I needed to learn how to be selfish in healthy ways. How to pursue my own interests without feeling guilty about taking time and energy away from supporting Robert. What if I don't know what my dreams are anymore? Then we figure them out together. We experiment. We explore. We try new things until you find something that excites you as much as writing excites me, and you'll really support whatever I decide to pursue? I'll do my best to support whatever you decide to pursue. I can't promise I'll be perfect at it right away, because I've gotten used to being the only one in this marriage with big dreams. But I can promise I'll try to learn how to be as good a supporter as you've been. It wasn't a perfect solution to 30 years of secrecy and misunderstanding, but it was a beginning. It was a commitment to building something new together, instead of just trying to repair what we'd had before. Robert, I love you. I know I've shown that love in ways that were problematic, but I need you to know that everything I did came from a place of genuine love and admiration for your talent. I know that, Margaret, and I love you too. I love you enough to be angry about the choices you made, and I love you enough to want to find a way forward that works better for both of us. Even if that means learning how to be married to each other all over again. Especially if that means learning how to be married to each other all over again. We sat in our kitchen as the evening deepened into night, two people who'd been married for 45 years, but were just beginning to understand what marriage might actually look like when built on honesty and mutual support instead of secrets and hidden sacrifice. Outside our window, Maple Street was quiet except for the occasional car passing by and the sound of Mrs. Patterson calling her cat in for the night. Normal sounds of a normal Tuesday evening in a life that would never be quite normal again. But maybe that was okay. Maybe normal had been overrated. Maybe what we needed was something better than normal, something more honest and more challenging and more truly loving than what we'd had before. "Are you ready to go upstairs?" Robert asked eventually. "I'd like to see those records you kept if you're willing to show them to me tonight." I nodded, feeling nervous and hopeful in equal measure. "They're in my desk drawer. 30 years worth of submission records, financial documentation, correspondence with editors, contest results. Everything you never knew about your own career. And tomorrow we'll start building the career I do know about. Tomorrow we'll start building the life we both know about." We stood up from our kitchen table and walked upstairs together, past the photographs that documented 45 years of marriage, past the bedroom where we'd shared our secrets and our silences, toward the small desk where I'd kept the truth hidden for 3 decades. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to start building something new together, something honest and mutual and brave. It was time to discover what love looked like when it didn't have to be secret anymore. The small desk in our spare bedroom had been my command center for 30 years, though Robert had always thought of it simply as the place where I paid our monthly bills and kept our household paperwork organized. He'd walked past it thousands of times without realizing that the bottom drawer contained detailed records of every aspect of his writing career that he'd never known existed. As I pulled out the thick manila folders, my hands were shaking slightly. These files represented decades of careful documentation, secret planning, and meticulous record-keeping. They were also evidence of the elaborate deception I'd maintained for most of our marriage, and I wasn't sure how Robert would react to seeing the full scope of what I'd been doing behind his back. "This folder contains submission records," I said, setting the first file on the desktop. Every story, essay, and novel excerpt I submitted on your behalf, organized chronologically. I have the dates of submission, the publications or contests I sent them to, the response times, and copies of all the correspondence. Robert opened the folder and stared at the neat rows of entries in my handwriting. Each submission was documented, with the precision of a business ledger: date sent, publication name, editor contact information, response received, follow-up actions taken. There were hundreds of entries spanning 3 decades. "You submitted my work to places I've never heard of," he said, running his finger down a page of entries from 1995. "What's Riverbend Literary Review? Or Mountain Voices Quarterly?" Small. Literary magazines that publish quality fiction but don't have large readerships. I researched hundreds of publications over the years, looking for markets that might be interested in your particular style and subject matter. Some of them only existed for a few years, but they all published good work and paid their contributors. Robert flipped through several pages, shaking his head in amazement. "You must have spent hours researching all of these publications." "I spent every Tuesday evening at the library for 20 years, reading through copies of Writer's Market and literary magazines, making lists of potential submission targets. After the library got internet access, I could do more research from home, but I still went in person to read the actual publications so I could get a feel for what kind of work they preferred." Every Tuesday evening for 20 years? "I told you I was attending a book club with some of the other nurses from the hospital." Which wasn't entirely a lie, since I was reading books. I just wasn't discussing them with anyone else. Robert sat down heavily in the desk chair, still holding the submission records. "Margaret, this level of organization and research, this is professional-level literary representation. You essentially gave me the services of a full-time agent, without me knowing about it. I gave you the services of a devoted amateur who was learning as she went along. A real agent would have been much more effective. But a real agent wouldn't have worked for free for 30 years. A real agent wouldn't have cared about my career the way you cared about it." I pulled out the second folder, this one containing financial records. "This shows every expense related to your writing career that I paid for without telling you about it. Contest entry fees, conference registrations, workshop tuition, research materials, postage costs, office supplies, everything." Robert opened the financial folder and immediately went pale. The first page showed a summary I'd compiled just the previous year, totaling up all the writing-related expenses I'd covered since 1993. The number at the bottom was larger than either of us had expected. $37,000, he read aloud. "You spent $37,000 on my writing career? Over 30 years, that's about $1,200 per year. It seemed manageable when I spread it out over time, and most of it came from overtime pay that we wouldn't have had otherwise. But Margaret, $37,000. Do you realize what we could have done with that money? We could have taken vacations, or renovated the kitchen, or built up our retirement savings." I'd known this moment would come, when Robert would have to confront the true cost of my secret support. It was one thing to know that I'd been submitting his work without his knowledge. It was another thing entirely to see the financial sacrifice I'd made documented in black and white. "I don't regret spending that money," I said firmly. "Every dollar went towards something you needed to develop as a writer. Conference fees that connected you with other authors and editors. Contest entries that got your work in front of judges who could recognize your talent. Research trips that made your historical novels more authentic. It was all money well spent. But you never asked me if that's how I wanted our money spent. You never gave me the chance to say that maybe I'd rather have financial security than writing success." That criticism stung because it was valid. I'd made unilateral decisions about our finances for 3 decades, justifying it as supporting Robert's dreams without ever asking if those dreams were worth the financial sacrifice to him. "You're right. I should have discussed those expenses with you instead of hiding them. But Robert, if I'd told you I wanted to spend $1,200 a year on your writing career, what would you have said? He was quiet for a moment, considering the question honestly. I probably would have said we couldn't afford it. I probably would have insisted that we use that money for more practical things. And you would have given up writing to avoid what you saw as a financial burden on our family. Maybe, but that should have been my choice to make. You're absolutely right. It should have been your choice to make. I took that choice away from you when I decided to fund your career. In secret. Robert closed the financial folder and looked at me with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and frustration. I'm having trouble processing all of this, Margaret. Part of me is amazed by your dedication and generosity. Part of me is angry that you made these decisions without consulting me. And part of me is wondering if my writing career is even real, if it was built on financial support I didn't know about. Your writing career is absolutely real. The financial support just gave you opportunities to develop your talent and share your work with a wider audience. But the talent itself, the stories you created, the skill you developed over time, that's all yours. I pulled out the third folder, this one containing copies of everything Robert had ever published. This is proof that your career is real. 43 publications in literary magazines, anthologies, and online journals. Contest wins and honorable mentions, positive reviews and reader responses. None of that happened because I spent money on contest entries. It happened because editors and judges recognized the quality of your writing. Robert opened the publications folder and immediately saw familiar stories printed in magazines he'd forgotten about. I remember writing this one, he said, pointing to a story called The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter, published in a magazine called Coastal Review. But I don't remember submitting it anywhere. You didn't submit it. I submitted it after reading about a contest they were running for stories about maritime life. I knew your piece about the lighthouse keeper would be perfect for their theme issue. And it won second place? It won second place and a $300 prize. I deposited the check in our savings account and told you it was a bonus from the hospital for working extra shifts during flu season. Robert stared at the published story, his own words printed in a magazine he'd never seen before. How many other prizes did I win without knowing about it? I flipped through the folder to a section where I'd compiled all his contest results. 12 contest wins, 8 second-place finishes, 15 honorable mentions, prize money totaling just over $4,000 over the years. $4,000 in prize money that I never knew about? $4,000 in prize money that helped offset some of the expenses I was covering for your writing career. I put every penny of it back into funding more submissions and conference fees. Robert was quiet for a long time, just reading through the list of contests he'd won and stories he'd published. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Margaret, do you understand what you've shown me tonight? For 30 years, I've thought of myself as a writer who occasionally got lucky with a small publication or contest win. But according to these records, I've actually had a fairly successful literary career. I've been published regularly, won significant contests, earned money from my writing, and built a reputation in the literary community. That's exactly what I've been trying to tell you. You're not a failed writer pursuing an impossible dream. You're a successful writer who just didn't know how successful you were. But I still don't know how much of this success was due to your strategic submissions, and how much was due to the quality of my work. I understood his confusion, but I also thought he was underestimating his own abilities. Robert, I want you to look at something. I pulled out a letter from the bottom of the publications folder, one that I'd saved for last because I thought it would be the most meaningful to him. This is a letter I received 3 years ago from Dr. Patricia Williams at the University of Vermont. She's a professor of contemporary American literature, and she was putting together an anthology of short fiction by emerging writers. Robert took the letter and read it carefully. Dr. Williams wrote that she'd been following his work for several years after encountering one of his stories in a literary magazine. She wanted to include 2 of his stories in her anthology and asked permission to reprint them. She also mentioned that she'd been discussing his work with her graduate students, and that several of them had written academic papers analyzing his themes and narrative techniques. "She's teaching your work at the university level," I said. "Graduate students are writing papers about your stories. That doesn't happen because of strategic submissions, Robert. That happens because you've written work that's worthy of academic study." I never heard from Dr. Williams. "Because I responded to her letter as your representative. I gave her permission to reprint the stories, and I sent her copies of other work I thought she might be interested in for future projects." "You corresponded with a university professor about my work?" "I corresponded with dozens of editors, contest organizers, and academics about your work over the years. I built professional relationships with people in the literary community who appreciated your writing." Robert set down Dr. Williams' letter and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or gratitude or confusion. It was something closer to awe. "Margaret, you didn't just support my writing career. You built my writing career. You created a professional network, established my reputation, and managed my literary relationships. You were my agent, my publicist, and my business manager all rolled into one. I was your wife who believed in your talent and wanted to see it recognized. But you were also much more than that. You were a professional-level advocate who understood the literary marketplace and knew how to navigate it effectively. I'd never thought of myself in those terms, but I suppose Robert was right. Over 30 years, I'd learned how to research publications, craft query letters, submit to contests, network with editors, and manage the business side of a writing career. I'd developed skills that most writers struggle to master themselves. Maybe I was, but I was an advocate who worked in secret, who made decisions without consulting the writer I was representing. That's not how professional relationships are supposed to work. No, it's not. But it's how our marriage worked, at least when it came to my writing. And I'm beginning to understand that our marriage was more complicated than I realized. Robert stood up from the desk chair and walked to the window that looked out over our backyard. The oak tree we'd planted 45 years ago was now tall enough to shelter our entire house, its branches reaching toward our bedroom window on the second floor. I keep thinking about all the times over the years when I felt discouraged about my writing, he said without turning around. All the times I considered giving up. All the times I wondered if I was deluding myself about my abilities. And now I find out that during those same periods, I was actually succeeding in ways I never knew about. You were succeeding because you were talented enough to succeed. I just made sure that your talent found the right audience. But what if knowing about my success would have made me a more confident writer? What if understanding that my work was being published and recognized would have inspired me to take bigger risks or pursue more ambitious projects? It was a question I'd been dreading because I didn't have a good answer for it. Had my secrecy actually limited Robert's growth as a writer? Had I protected him from the confidence that might have made him even more successful? I don't know, I admitted. I thought I was protecting you from the pressure and disappointment that comes with submitting work professionally. But maybe I was also protecting you from the confidence and ambition that comes with knowing you're successful. I think you were. I think if I'd known 10 years ago that I'd won 12 writing contests and been published in 40 magazines, I might have approached my novel writing differently. I might have been more ambitious about the stories I chose to tell or the publishers I tried to reach. Does that mean you think I harmed your career by keeping it secret? Robert turned away from the window and looked at me directly. I think you helped my career in some ways and limited it in others. I think your support was both the best thing and the worst thing that could have happened to my development as a writer. It was a complex assessment, but probably an accurate one. I'd solved one set of problems for Robert while creating another set. I'd protected him from the discouragement of rejection while also protecting him from the empowerment of success. So, where does that leave us? I asked. It leaves us with a choice about how to move forward. We can focus on what might have been different if I'd known about my success earlier. Or we can focus on building the career I want to have from this. Point forward. What do you want to focus on? I want to focus on moving forward. I want to work with Sarah Sterling to submit my novels to publishers. I want to use the reputation you helped me build as a foundation for bigger achievements. And I want to do all of that with you as my partner instead of my secret manager. The word partner sent a thrill through me that I hadn't expected. After 30 years of working behind the scenes, the possibility of working openly with Robert on his career felt almost revolutionary. What would being your partner look like? It would look like us making decisions together about which publishers to target, which contests to enter, which conferences to attend. It would look like celebrating successes together and mourning rejections together. It would look like me acknowledging your contributions publicly instead of you having to hide them. And it would look like you supporting my goals the same way I've supported yours. Exactly. It would look like a real partnership instead of a secret caregiving arrangement. I thought about what that kind of partnership might feel like after decades of secrecy. Would I be able to offer opinions and advice openly instead of manipulating situations from behind the scenes? Would Robert be able to accept my input without feeling like his independence was being threatened? It sounds wonderful in theory, I said. But I'm not sure either of us knows how to have that kind of partnership after so many years of doing things differently. Then we'll have to learn. We'll have to practice being honest with each other about our feelings and our fears and our hopes. We'll have to get used to making decisions together instead of separately. What if we're not good at it? What if we've been keeping secrets for so long that we don't know how to be honest anymore? Robert walked back to the desk and picked up one of the folders containing my documentation of his career. Then we'll make mistakes and figure out how to do better. But Margaret, I'd rather make mistakes while trying to build an honest partnership than continue succeeding based on deception and secrecy, even if the honesty is more complicated than the secrecy was. Especially if the honesty is more complicated than the secrecy was. Complicated can be good if it leads to something real. I thought about the decades I'd spent carefully managing every aspect of Robert's career without his knowledge, how much simpler it had been to make decisions unilaterally than it would be to negotiate and compromise and explain my reasoning. But Robert was right that simple hadn't necessarily been better. There's something else I need to show you, I said, reaching for the bottom drawer of my desk. Something I've been saving for a special occasion that never seemed to come. I pulled out a small wrapped package about the size of a book that I'd been keeping in my desk for over a year. This came in the mail 14 months ago, and I've been waiting for the right moment to give it to you. Robert looked at the package suspiciously. What is it? Open it and see. He unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a hardcover book with his name printed on the spine in gold letters. It was a special edition of Bridges in the Rain, printed by Millfield Press for contributors to their annual literary anthology. They only printed 50 copies of this edition, I explained. It's bound in real leather and printed on archival paper. They sent it to you as a thank you for allowing them to include an excerpt from your novel in their anthology. Robert held the book reverently, running his fingers over the cover and opening it to see his name on the title page. This is beautiful. Why didn't you give it to me when it arrived? Because I was afraid that if I gave it to you, you'd ask questions about how you ended up in their anthology, and I'd have to admit that I submitted the excerpt without telling you about it. So you've been keeping my own book away from me for over a year? I've been keeping your own book away from you for over a year, and I realize now how wrong that was. This book belongs to you, not to me. It's evidence of your achievement, and you should have had the chance to enjoy it when it arrived. Robert flipped through the pages, reading his own words in beautiful typography on high-quality paper. It really does look like a real book, doesn't it? Like something you'd find in a bookstore or a library. It is a real book, Robert. It's your real book, created because real editors thought your work was worth publishing in a prestigious literary anthology, and you submitted the excerpt that got me included? I submitted the excerpt, but they selected it for inclusion based on its quality. They could have chosen to publish any of the hundreds of submissions they received, but they chose yours. Robert closed the book and held it against his chest like he was afraid it might disappear. For the first time since you showed me that shoebox this morning, I'm starting to feel proud of my writing, instead of confused about it. Why this book in particular? Because it's tangible evidence that my work has value independent of the circumstances under which it was submitted. This book exists because editors recognize the quality of my writing. That recognition might not have happened without your submission, but it could only have happened because the writing itself was worth recognizing. I felt a surge of relief that I hadn't expected. All day, I'd been worried that revealing the truth about my secret support would make Robert feel less confident about his abilities. But seeing him hold that beautiful edition of his novel, I could see that he was beginning to understand the difference between earned talent and created opportunity. So you're starting to believe that you're actually a good writer? I'm starting to believe that I'm actually a good writer who's been fortunate to have someone who believed in my work enough to share it with the world. That's not the same as being a failure or a fraud. That's just being a writer who had an advocate. Most successful writers have advocates, Robert. They have agents and editors and publishers who believe in their work and help them find readers. The only unusual thing about your situation is that your advocate was also your wife, and she worked in secret. When you put it that way, it sounds almost normal. It is almost normal. Writers need support systems to succeed. The publishing world is too competitive and complicated for most people to navigate entirely on their own. Robert set the leather-bound book on the desk next to the folders containing 30 years of documentation. So what happens now? How do we transition from you being my secret advocate to being my open partner? I think we start by calling Sarah Sterling tomorrow and telling her that we'd like to work with her as a team. We explain that you're the writer and I'm your business partner, and we'd like all future communications to include both of us. You want to be my official business partner? I want to be whatever kind of partner would be most helpful to your career, whether that's business partner or manager or just supportive spouse who's allowed to know what's happening. What I'd like is for you to be my collaborator on the business side of my writing career. I want you to use all the knowledge and expertise you've developed over 30 years to help me make smart decisions about my future as a writer. It was more than I'd dared to hope for. Instead of being pushed out of Robert's writing life as punishment for my secrecy, I was being invited to participate in it openly for the first time. Are you sure you want my help? After everything I did without your permission? I'm sure. I want your help. I'm not sure yet that I trust your judgment completely, but I'm sure I want your help. Trust is something we'll have to rebuild over time. How do we rebuild trust? We rebuild trust by making decisions together instead of separately. We rebuild trust by talking about our fears and concerns instead of acting on them secretly. We rebuild trust by keeping our promises to each other about honesty and partnership. It sounded like a reasonable plan, though I knew it would be harder to implement than it was to describe. After 30 years of secrecy, learning to be completely honest would require changing fundamental patterns in our relationship. Robert, I want you to know that I'm committed to earning back your trust. I'm committed to being the kind of partner you deserve instead of the kind of secret manager I've been. And I want you to know that I'm committed to being the kind of partner who supports your dreams the way you've supported mine. We're going to figure out what Margaret Hayes wants to do with the rest of her life, and I'm going to help make it happen. The promise brought tears to my eyes. For 30 years, I'd focused entirely on Robert's dreams while setting my own aside. The possibility of having my own aspirations supported and encouraged felt almost foreign after so many years of being the supporter rather than the supported. What if I don't know what my dreams are anymore? Then we'll figure them out together. We'll explore your interests, try new things, and see what excites you. We have time, Margaret. We have years ahead of us to build the kind of marriage we should have had all along. I looked around the small room that had been my secret headquarters for 3 decades, at the desk where I'd planned Robert's submissions and tracked his successes, at the files that documented a career he'd never known he was having. Tomorrow, this would just be a spare bedroom again. The real work of managing Robert's writing career would move into the open, into our shared life where it belonged. "Are you ready to go to bed?" I asked. "Tomorrow is going to be a big day." "Tomorrow is going to be the first day of the rest of our marriage," Robert said. "The first day we try to love each other honestly instead of secretly." "Are you nervous about that?" "Terrified, but also excited. For the first time in 30 years, I feel like I'm married to a partner instead of a mystery." We turned off the light in the spare bedroom and walked down the hall to our own room, past the shoebox that had started this whole revelation, past the evidence of a love that had been both profound and problematic. Tomorrow we would begin the work of building something new together, something honest and equal and mutual. But tonight, we were just 2 people who'd been married for 45 years and were finally beginning to understand what marriage might actually mean. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our house on Maple Street, reading the morning newspaper while waiting for the coffee to finish brewing. The familiar sound of Robert's typewriter drifted down from his study, but now it carried a different energy than it had for decades. Instead of the desperate, solitary clicking of a man writing in isolation, it was the confident rhythm of someone who knew his work would be read and appreciated. The phone rang at exactly 9 o'clock, just as I'd expected it would. Sarah Sterling called every Thursday morning at 9 to discuss Robert's career progress and upcoming opportunities. These calls had become the highlight of our week, a symbol of how dramatically our lives had changed since that Tuesday morning when everything fell apart and came back together. "Good morning, Sarah," I said as I picked up the phone. "Robert's just finishing up his morning writing session. He'll be down in a few minutes." "Perfect timing, Margaret. I have exciting news to share with both of you." Over the past 6 months, I'd grown to love Sarah Sterling's enthusiasm almost as much as Robert did. She was everything we'd hoped. For in a literary agent, knowledgeable about the marketplace, passionate about quality writing, and skilled at negotiating contracts that protected her clients' interests. But more than that, she genuinely appreciated Robert's work and understood his vision as a writer. Robert appeared in the kitchen just as I was switching the call to speakerphone so we could both participate in the conversation. This had become our routine, a small but significant symbol of the partnership we were building together. "Sarah, good morning," Robert said, settling into his chair at our kitchen table. "Margaret said you have news for us." "I do indeed. I heard back from Riverside Publications yesterday evening, and they want to offer you a 2-book deal for Bridges in the Rain and its sequel." The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Robert and I looked at each other across our kitchen table, both of us processing what Sarah had just told us. A 2-book deal. A real publishing contract with a respected literary publisher. "What kind of terms are they offering?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Better terms than we expected for a debut novelist. A $15,000 advance? Split between the 2 books, with standard royalty rates and a commitment to publish both novels within the next 3 years. They also want first right of refusal on Robert's next project after these 2 books. Robert's hands were shaking as he reached across the table to squeeze mine. $15,000 was more money than he'd ever imagined earning from his writing. More importantly, it was validation that his work was commercially viable, that publishers believed readers would want to buy his books. "When do they need an answer?" Robert asked. "They'd like a response within the next 2 weeks. which gives us plenty of time to review the contract terms and negotiate any changes we think are necessary. Overall, though, it's a strong offer from a publisher with an excellent reputation for literary fiction. After we ended the call with Sarah, Robert and I sat in our kitchen in stunned silence. The man who'd been planning to take a job at an insurance company 6 months earlier was now being offered a book deal that would launch his career as a professional novelist. "I can't quite believe this is really happening," Robert said finally. "It's happening because you're a talented writer whose work deserves to be published. That's what I've been trying to tell you for 30 years. It's happening because I'm a talented writer who had an advocate willing to spend 3 decades building his career behind the scenes. Let's be honest about that, Margaret." Over the past 6 months, we'd had many conversations about the role my secret support had played in Robert's success. We'd learned to acknowledge both his talent and my contribution without diminishing either one. It had been a delicate balance to strike, but an important one for our relationship. "It's happening because we made a good team, even when we didn't know we were a team," I said. "And now we get to be a good team intentionally." The transition to open partnership hadn't been as smooth as either of us had hoped. There had been moments when I'd fallen back into my old patterns of making decisions without consulting Robert, and moments when he'd struggled to accept my input after years of working independently. But we'd kept talking through our difficulties, and gradually we'd learned how to collaborate instead of operating in secret. "Have you given any more thought to what you want to do about your own goals?" Robert asked. "Now that my career is on solid ground, we can focus more attention on figuring out what Margaret Hayes wants to accomplish." It was a question he'd been asking regularly for months, and one I was finally beginning to have an answer for. After 30 years of defining myself primarily as Robert's supporter, discovering my own aspirations had been more challenging than either of us had anticipated. "Actually, I have been thinking about it, and I have an idea that might surprise you." "I'm listening." "I want to go back to school. Not for nursing, like I originally planned, but for something completely different. I want to study library science and become a research librarian who specializes in helping writers and researchers." Robert's eyes lit up with interest. "That sounds perfect for you, Margaret. You've developed incredible research skills over the years, and you understand what writers need to support their work." "I've been looking into programs at the State University. They have a master's degree in library and information science that I could complete in 2 years, mostly through evening and weekend classes. The tuition would be about the same as what I used to spend annually on your writing career." "And you want to do this? You're excited about the possibility?" I thought about the hours I'd spent over the years researching publications and opportunities for Robert. How much I'd enjoyed the detective work of finding the perfect market for each of his stories. The idea of using those same skills professionally, helping other writers and researchers find the resources they needed, felt like a natural extension of work I'd already been doing. "I'm more excited about this than I've been about anything in years. I think I'd be good at it, and I think it would give me a sense of professional identity separate from being your supportive wife." "Then we should make it happen. We can use some of the advance money from the book deal to cover your tuition, and I can take on more of the household responsibilities while you're in classes." The ease with which Robert offered to support my dreams, the immediate enthusiasm he showed for my goals, made me understand how much he must have longed for that same kind of support over the years. I'd been so focused on providing financial and logistical support for his writing that I'd forgotten the importance of emotional encouragement and genuine excitement for someone else's aspirations. "Are you sure you want to use the book advance money for my education? That's your achievement, your reward for years of hard work. Margaret, that book advance is our achievement. It's the result of your research and submissions and advocacy as much as it is the result of my writing. Using part of it to fund your graduate education seems like the perfect way to invest in our shared future." I felt tears starting in my eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than regret. For the first time in our marriage, we were truly partners in each other's dreams. We were both pursuing our own goals while supporting each other's aspirations. "There's something else I want to tell you," I said. "Something I realized while I was researching library science programs." "What's that?" "I realized that all these years I spent secretly managing your writing career weren't just about supporting your dreams. They were also about pursuing my own interests in literary research and career development. I enjoyed the strategic thinking and the networking and the business side of writing almost as much as you enjoyed the creative side." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "So, in a way, you were pursuing your own career goals, just not in a way that either of us recognized at the time." "Exactly. I was developing skills and expertise and professional relationships, but I was doing it all in your name instead of my own. Going back to school would give me a chance to use those same skills in my own professional identity. And it would give you a chance to help other writers the way you helped me, but openly and with proper recognition for your contributions." The idea of becoming a professional advocate for writers and researchers, of using my skills to support creative work, in an official capacity, felt like the perfect synthesis of everything I'd learned over the past 30 years. I could continue doing work I was passionate about while building my own career instead of hiding behind someone else's. "I've already contacted the admissions office at the university," I said. "They're interested in having me as a student, especially since I have practical experience in literary research and database management." "When would you start?" "Next fall, if everything works out. I'd be 53 when I graduate, but that still gives me plenty of years to build a career in library science." 53 is nothing. You'll be 53 anyway. The question is whether you'll be 53 with a master's degree and a new career, or 53 wishing you'd taken the chance when you had it. Robert's encouragement meant everything to me. After decades of supporting his dreams while setting my own aside, having someone else believe in my potential felt almost revolutionary. "There's one more thing I want to discuss with you," I said. "Something about how we handle your writing career going forward." "What about it?" "I think we should make my role in your career official. Not just between us, but publicly. I want people to know that I've been your business partner and advocate, not just your supportive wife who happens to help out occasionally." Robert looked surprised. "You want public recognition for the work you've done?" "I want public recognition for the work I continue to do. I want to be listed as your manager or business partner in your book acknowledgments. I want editors and publishers to know that I'm an equal partner in your career decisions. I want other writers to understand that successful careers are often built with the support of dedicated advocates. You want to come out of the shadows, so to speak. I want to come out of the shadows and take credit for the professional skills I've developed over 30 years. Those skills have value, Robert. They're worth acknowledging and celebrating." "I think that's a wonderful idea. In fact, I'd like to dedicate my first published novel to you, with a dedication that explains what you've done for my career." The thought of seeing my name in Robert's book, of having my contributions acknowledged publicly after 3 decades of secrecy, brought fresh tears to my eyes. "What would you say in the dedication?" I'd say something like, "To Margaret, my wife, my partner, and my advocate, who believed in my writing before I did and spent 30 years making sure the world had a chance to read it. This book exists because of your love, your sacrifice, and your unwavering faith in the power of stories." "That's beautiful. But you might want to add something about how I did it all without your knowledge, just to give readers the full picture." Robert laughed. "You want me to publicly admit that my wife managed my entire writing career in secret for 3 decades? I want you to publicly admit that love sometimes makes people do extraordinary things, even when those things are complicated and imperfect. I can do that. I think readers would be fascinated by our story. It might even inspire other couples to think differently about how they support each other's dreams." The idea that our story might help other people navigate the complexities of love and ambition and partnership felt like the perfect ending to 30 years of secrecy. Instead of hiding what I'd done, we could share it as an example of both: the power and the pitfalls of unconditional support. "Have I ever told you that I love you?" I asked, reaching across the table to take Robert's hand. "You've told me that you love me thousands of times. But until 6 months ago, I didn't really understand what that love looked like in action. Now I do. And now I get to love you honestly instead of secretly. And now we both get to love each other as partners instead of as caregivers and dependents." I thought about the long journey that had brought us to this moment, sitting in our kitchen on a Thursday morning in September, planning a future that included published novels and graduate school and honest partnership. 6 months ago, I'd been terrified that revealing my secret would destroy our marriage. Instead, it had saved it. "Do you ever regret the way things happened?" I asked. "Do you ever wish I'd been honest with you from the beginning?" Robert considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain we both experienced because of the secrecy. I regret the years when I felt unsupported and you felt unappreciated. But I don't regret the dedication you showed to my writing career, even if the methods were problematic. And I don't regret a single dollar I spent or a single hour I worked to support your dreams. I only regret that I did it in a way that made you feel alone instead of loved. We did the best we could with what we knew at the time. Now we know better, so we can do better." The phone rang again, interrupting our conversation. This time it was Emma, our daughter, calling from Portland with her weekly update on the twins and her husband's new job and her own career as a high school English teacher. "How are Dad's writing projects going?" she asked, as she did every week. Robert and I looked at each other, and he nodded for me to share the news. "Actually, Emma, your father just got offered a 2-book deal with a major publisher. He's going to be a professionally published novelist." The squeal of excitement that came through the phone was so loud that both Robert and I started laughing. Emma had always been proud of her father's writing, even during the years when we thought it wasn't leading anywhere. Hearing that his work was finally getting the recognition it deserved made her as happy as it made us. "Dad, that's incredible. When will the books be published? Will I be able to buy them in real bookstores?" "The first one should be out within the next year," Robert said. "And yes, you'll be able to buy them in real bookstores. You might even see them reviewed in real newspapers and magazines." "I'm so proud of you, Dad. And Mom, I'm proud of you too for supporting his dreams all these years." Emma had no idea just how accurate her praise was, but someday we'd tell her the full story of what her mother had done to support her father's writing career. For now, it was enough that she recognized the partnership that had finally emerged from 30 years of secrecy. After we ended the call with Emma, Robert returned to his study to continue working on the sequel to Bridges in the Rain, and I sat alone in our kitchen thinking about how much our lives had changed in just 6 months. The shoebox that had started everything was now empty, its contents organized in proper file folders and integrated into our shared understanding of Robert's career. The secrets that had nearly destroyed our marriage had become the foundation for a stronger partnership than we'd ever had before. At 72, I was about to start graduate school and launch a new career as a research librarian. At 68, Robert was about to become a published novelist with a real agent and a 2-book contract. We were both pursuing dreams we'd thought were impossible, and we were doing it together instead of separately. The sound of the typewriter upstairs reminded me that some things hadn't changed. Robert was still the same dedicated writer he'd always been, still crafting beautiful sentences and compelling characters and moving stories. The difference was that now his work was part of our shared life, instead of his solitary struggle. I picked up the morning newspaper and turned to the book review section, imagining the day when I might see Robert's name there, when his novel would be discussed and analyzed and recommended to readers who were looking for the kind of thoughtful literary fiction he'd always written. It would happen because of his talent, but it would also happen because we'd learned how to be partners in making dreams come true. Outside our kitchen window, Mrs. Patterson was working in her garden again, preparing her flower beds for the coming winter. The oak tree Robert and I had planted 45 years ago was beginning to turn yellow and red, its leaves preparing for their seasonal transformation. Everything in our world was changing, but changing in the direction of growth and beauty and new possibilities. The typewriter upstairs fell silent for a moment, then resumed its steady rhythm. Robert was writing, as he had for 43 years, but now he was writing with the confidence of someone whose work would be read and appreciated. And I was supporting him, as I had for 30 years. But now I was supporting him as an acknowledged partner instead of a secret advocate. It wasn't the marriage we'd planned to have when we stood at the altar 45 years ago, but it was the marriage we'd earned through love and mistakes and forgiveness and growth. It was honest and equal and mutual, built on shared dreams instead of hidden sacrifices. And it was, finally, exactly what both of us needed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.